With their steep gradients and narrow hairpin bends, the Alps offer Europe's most challenging roads. 90 years ago, when cars were in their infancy and the roads rougher, the challenge was even greater. The best car in the world in those days, without a shadow of a doubt, was this, the Rolls-Royce Silver Ghost. But back then, its reputation still had to be proven, so the factory decided to enter what was one of the toughest motoring competitions around. An event which went up and down 19 Alpine passes over a distance of 1,750 miles in only 8 days. The year was 1913, and the event was the Austrian Alpine Trial, or Alpenfahrt. The test was reliability. Bonnets were sealed and points were lost for every fault, from a broken gearbox to wonky steering. The route started in Vienna and passed through Salzburg and Innsbruck before reaching the Italian lakes at Riva del Garda. It was then up over the Dolomites before heading south for the Adriatic at Apatia in Croatia. The return trip to Vienna was through today's Slovenia, crossing back into Austria over the Leubel Pass. Four Rollsers carried off virtually all the honours against strong competition. The star car was driven by pioneer aeronaut and balloonist James Radley. The reputation of the Ghost was made forever. Now, to you and me, Austria is Julie Andrews in a habit. It's the birthplace of National Socialism. It's Mozart. It's silly horses that can't walk properly. But to a Rolls-Royce enthusiast, Austria is the place where their cars earned the reputation that they still have today. That's why, to mark the 80th anniversary of the Alpine Trial, 50 of them from all over the world have come here to do the route all over again. The hills are indeed alive to the sound of music, but it's the kind of music you get from a 7.5-litre handcrafted engine. In 1913, the whole route was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Vienna still looks decidedly imperial. And there was time to enjoy it too, because competitors on the Motorola Alpine 93 had 15 days for the trip. The more leisurely schedule was just as well, perhaps, since many of them had already travelled halfway round the world to get here. And as our man Tony Mason, who was going to join them for the journey, discovered, some were even older than their cars.
It was delivered as a new chassis on the same day that war was declared in 1914, in August the 4th, 1914. So in 1920, Lady Houston bought it, and she died in 1940, and the local undertakers in St. Helier bought the car because they wanted it for a hearse. And so they cut out a piece at the back to put the coffins in, you see, and they used it for 15 years as a hearse, and that's when I bought it in 1955. And it remained with me for 10, 12 years before I decided let's put a body on it. And I got it finished in 1985. That's 30 years after I bought the chassis. I took my time about it.
In fact, George wasn't the oldest driver present. Bob May beat him by a few days.
We had one rally a few years ago. We did 14 passes in 7 days.
Oh.
And that was, some of those were dirt roads, you know. So, you know, it's all right. Most of my mileage is done with a Bentley, though. I've got a 1929 Bentley, and I've done 330,000 miles in it in 23 years.
You're not meant to mention that here on this event, you know.
No, I know. I'm a Bentley man, really. You know.
Leaving Vienna, the cars headed down the very long straight road where the local rival company, Austro-Daimler, used to speed test its cars. As you might expect, the Rolls-Royces took this well within their stride. But they wouldn't be seeing many more roads as flat as this, for it was, after all, a mountain challenge. Only 44 of the cars in the Tour were actually silver ghosts. There were also several phantoms, like this 1931 Phantom II that used to belong to Spanish racing driver Don Carlos, Marquis of Salamanca. And there was a solitary Prince Henry Vauxhall, which had been admitted from New Zealand. Not quite the interloper you might think, since the Vauxhalls were very successful in old Alpine trials.
Although this isn't meant to be a race or a rally, just a gentle touring assembly, there's one car that I've had the utmost difficulty in catching up with. It's the car that actually competed in the 1913 event in the hands of James Radley. It must be the most famous Rolls-Royce here. Just as modern competition cars are modified somewhat from their showroom equivalents, so Radley's car was altered from standard specification in order that it could cope with the demands of Alpine trialling. It had a larger radiator, for instance, with its own expansion tank, and on top of it, for good measure, his own personal mascot.
There was that most vital Alpine accoutrement, an altimeter, an extra fuel tank for improved range, and toughened suspension with a higher colonial setting for the rough roads.
It also had a 4-speed gearbox, a bigger carburettor, and a more powerful engine underneath the sealed bonnet. And because you couldn't open the bonnet, it had an extra oil reservoir with another dipstick and a primer so that the oil would be squirted in all the right places. And, of course, the great James Radley also built his own bodywork. Was there no end to the man's talents?
The driver of James Radley's car on this event was quite a character himself, John Kennedy. He'd brought a period Austrian army officer with him because, in the original event, he had to travel on board to make sure the drivers didn't cheat. This one seemed to have been rather hastily recruited. He'd only come with half his uniform. One problem Radley certainly never faced was tourist coaches, but in most respects they were managing to recreate the old atmosphere as accurately as possible. The attention to detail was not lost on the other drivers, and anyway, a uniform always comes in handy for directing the traffic. Kennedy already had one huge fan in the shape of Derek Dutoit from the American Rolls-Royce Club.
I think they're doing a wonderful job of really getting into the spirit of the event. Some of the things that you might like to consider is if we come to the front of the car here, just come down here and have a look at this bonnet seal here. This bonnet has been sealed before the start of the event in exactly the way they did in 1913. The radiator is sealed. He's not going to be able to put in any water for the entire trip. And when we get to the end of the entire trip, Herr Oberleutnant is going to check everything to see that he hasn't lost any marks by filling up or attending to the engine at all. All the other people that are adjusting their engines and messing around with valves and this sort of thing, Mr. Radley is not going to do that. As he did not in 1913, so he shall not in 1993. For example, that hat that he's wearing is an exact copy of the original hat that Radley wore. I'm pretty sure, at least I believe, that he got that hat from the same people in Bond Street that Radley got the hat from in 1913. How's that for detail?
Marvellous. Mind, it looks a bit unsuitable to me. I would have thought it would blow off.
No, he's got it jammed in very tight, and if he took it off, there'd be a mark on his head. Radley never seemed to ever take it off.
As long as you keep it firmly in place and you tilt your head so that the wind vortex just comes over like that, it stays on quite comfortably.
The first severe challenge to face the cars was 400 miles from Vienna, the 5,000-foot-high Catchberg Pass. In 1913, the Autocars correspondent remarked, "No one who has not seen it with his own eyes can form any adequate idea as to the severity of the climb." Indeed, he suggested that few touring cars could reach the summit without radiators of the most effective kind. There were few problems today as the cars cruised to the top in stately fashion. The Radley car climbed up with the same ease that it had in 1913 when it astonished contemporary observers by its ability to make the ascent at an average speed of 25 miles an hour.
The year before, it was a different story, when James Radley, driving the only Rolls-Royce in the event, failed to get up this final steep bit. He unceremoniously dumped his passengers, got to the top, and then went off home in disgust. Now, as Rolls-Royce were about to open their first dealership in Vienna, they thought that something had better be done about it. So they sent out teams of mechanics and cars from England for testing and development. The main modification they made was to put 4-speed gearboxes in all Silver Ghosts, and the following year, they came back for victory. How did you like the catchbird?
Well, it didn't fly up. It's been flying up most of the passes, but you had to use second and bottom. But it's steep, you know. It's a steep hill.
How do you like it when it was on surface?
Oh, better, more fun. I mean, the whole point of the rally is sport, you know. I'll get out of your work.
Seems to be steaming a bit there.
Oh, I will do, yes.
Nothing to worry about.
Well, no, it'll go off. It'll need a bit of water now, but it's on the boil.
What did you think of that climb?
Oh, it's quite good, really.
Yes.
Came up in second gear except for the last bit, so that's why it's hot.
Very good.
Okay.
Every afternoon in Austria, conditions were positively monsoon-like. But the best car in the world was more than a match for the inclement weather. For hardier souls who couldn't be troubled to erect their hoods, a little bailing out was called for. Only one car had a bit of a problem.
We'll be fine tomorrow.
We've got an ignition problem. It's got two ignitions as all these vehicles. One's a magneto and the other's a coil. The coil's not functioning very well. Well, it's not functioning at all.
When did that start then?
Well, over the last 40 miles. We've just recently found it out.
So,
But it's not really functioning very well on the magneto either. So
what are you going to do now then?
well, we're running with the bonnet open so we get some heat out. So we're thinking that if we've less heat, it might go better.
All right.
But that's what we're praying. Are you looking for two totally pissed off women because they're in the back?
We haven't been speaking for the last half hour.
Those other people, they're all back at the hotel, they'll be fed up, they won't know what to do. We're having great fun here.
There'd been no retirements by the time the cars reached Innsbruck in spite of the rotten weather. It became apparent to me that most of the enthusiasts were the men. Fortunately, their wives seemed to be high on tolerance and understanding.
Just a magnificent piece of machinery. It's like an antique piece of furniture. Once you're hooked on it, you can't settle for less than the best. And Rolls-Royce, the old Rolls-Royces certainly were way ahead of their time.
So I'm really not interested in the upkeep. I plan the picnics and I pack the picnic baskets and bring the champagne, or if we're going to have cheese and crackers, and that's all I do. I think he'd like me to help him clean the cars, polish the brass. I don't think my husband cares that I don't like fixing them, but you have to enjoy riding in them, or you're probably not going to have a happy marriage. You're going to, because it's a big part of our lives. We do a lot of, our vacations are usually around car rallies.
Happily, the weather took a turn for the better on the fourth day as the entourage left Austria and glided into Italy. A different country, but the historical legacy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire survives because most people in this part of Italy still speak German. Alpine tours aren't complete without the Stelvio Pass, one of the most spectacular series of switchbacks anywhere in the world. It zigzags its way up through 48 hairpins to a height of over 9,000 feet. In a lifetime of rallying, I'd been up and down it dozens of times, so I dispatched another member of our party, young Amanda, for some real first impressions.
You've been looking forward to doing this for a
Oh yeah,
while.
I mean this is the most important piece of motoring in all of the Alps, they say. This road was intended to be used on both the 1913 and 14 Alpenfahrts, but oddly enough, the Italians who were happy to see the road get used were not the impediment. It was the Swiss who wouldn't allow the little piece of a valley road to be used by motor cars. You know, some of them seem to be different on right or left. Depends on whether you have the...
Sorry about that.
Here's the one with no guardrail.
Well, that's lovely.
10,000 feet to the
I think
ground.
I'll just check to see what's coming. Oh, it's another one with no guardrail. People don't like this bit.
Yeah, it looks like someone crashed right over the edge of that one.
Oh. Right, we're okay, we're clear. This is brilliant.
This is a nice wide one, yeah.
This is good.
This pass was originally used, as I understand it, for
We're okay.
Napoleon's gun carriages and transporting them into Italy, I guess. Napoleon apparently had reason to want to get his big guns over this mountain range. I'm sure that a gun carriage, because it swivels in the middle, would not have had any trouble with the tight turns. That's why the switchbacks did not need to be made bigger. At this point, we got to go up on half throttle because we're now at about 201 or 202 degrees Fahrenheit.
And that's bad.
If you don't maintain the balance between temperature and performance, you're going to, well, eventually, assuming you're trying to go too fast, you'll boil the water out of the engine. You'll get into an ever-decreasing amount of water situation where...
Okay, sit round.
Oh, yeah,
woo!
Piece of cake, this one, yeah. I wonder what that little...
People are hiding, I guess.
Yeah, somebody is supposed to hide in there. Maybe it's for a gendarme.
You have to keep your hands on the wheel when you do this.
Oh, no. Cars itself.
Oh, no.
It's weird. Want to drive?
No, I don't want to drive.
Once the team had reached the top, looking for all the world like Laurel and Hardy, it was time to go back down. Descents show up the great Achilles heel of early Ghosts, the rather feeble two-wheel brakes.
Well, the difficulty in going down is that you don't have sufficient brakes, really, you know, for modern, by comparison to a modern car. I have not yet so far touched the brakes.
So you've been
We have
totally
used
using it on
virtually,
gears?
right, virtually no brakes during the whole descent so far. That way, if I need them, I got them.
But the best thing is to try and do it all on your
They
gears.
go away very quickly, the brakes.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Oh, dear goodness, this is horrendous. Thank you. Thank you, Toby.
My pleasure. An excellent bit of navigation despite the freezing conditions that last all year round on this terrifying road. The Stelvio excursion out of the way, it was back on the Alpine trial route and warmer climes. Full speed ahead westward through northern Italy. One car was setting the pace, the solo Alan Clark in his 1919 military model, who was frequently balked by slower cars, much to his annoyance. There's no doubting that Alpine trialling can be an extra challenge when you're on your own. There's the difficulty of navigation, particularly in confusing Italian villages.
This is the right way.
Indeed it was, but there's less guesswork when you're part of a team.
You go down here, this is the original road down into Riva del Garda before they built this tunnel. Amazing. No, it's only a short tunnel.
The organisers were determined to follow the exact route come what may, which often meant turning off the main roads. This tortuous bit, seemingly carved out of the rock face itself, was on the way down to the Italian lakeside resort of Riva del Garda.
vibration? Holy sound. Look at that view there. Isn't that magnificent? Look at it. Lovely. There's Riva down in the bottom. Lots of phosphorus.
Of course, high-class car tours like this one aren't just about driving. There's some serious entertaining on the menu, with up to 5 receptions a day from villages and towns en route. Indeed, there's a veritable circuit of Rolls-Royce tours the world over, with events from Australia and New Zealand to California and South Africa, where the same people and their families meet up. It's an exclusive club, and the entertainment laid on can be lavish to say the least. The only problem is cramming all the people and the luggage into the Ghosts.
Very nice tonight. I mean, all this wardrobe and so on, and it all seems to be bundled in suitcases in the back of the car. Is that a problem?
Well, no, we didn't take any passengers, so we have a large body in our car. Right, I told him to design it with a large body.
Well, for your wardrobe.
Right, exactly. No, we have plenty of room for luggage, but other people don't. Anyway, and I wish I had known there were going to be more evenings like this. I would have brought more clothes, actually. I mean, it's been pretty fancy parties.
Well, it's Tom actually who signed up for this trip, my father-in-law. It's his car, it's not mine. And he signed up some 3 years ago. He's not allowed to drive on the wrong side of the road.
I put his name down because I thought I might not be here by then.
Many of the public get the impression from the inflated prices that are made at auction sales that we're all multi-millionaires driving around in bloated luxury, but we're not, many of us. I mean, I bought my first car in 1958. It cost me £50. I made the body, I restored the car, and have been driving these cars ever since. So some of us have a lot of money, others don't. How much is a tour like this? I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe about £12,000. I'm really not sure.
He should know. He's an accountant. 7 days out, and servicing and repairs were also due, not least to the tyres.
That seems to be one of the stories of this event, Punches. People have had them, I think.
It's not uncommon. The problem is, you see, that they don't make them necessarily with the same quality control when that was what all the tyres were. Because originally they didn't have very many tyre problems at all, and of course they had somewhat rougher roads than we've got. But
how did James Radley get on for punctures in his heyday?
Didn't have any on the Alpenfahrt at all. No punctures. None of the Rolls-Royce team had any punctures.
This was meant to be a day of rest beside Lake Garda. Rolls-Royces can't resist washing and titivating the cars, and even subjecting them to the indignity of a jet wash. Some owners were greedier for punishment than others.
Is this routine maintenance, or...?
Oh, yes. Says in the book, do it every 1,000 miles, you see.
Oh, right, so you've already done that, of course, since you started...
I've done 2,500 since I started from home.
So how long will this take you now this morning?
Well, it would normally take me... If I play around and clean things, which I probably won't, it would take me about 3 hours. That's a skimpy. I'm only going to do the things which matter.
After 9 days of force-feeding with gourmet mountain scenery, the Italian Dolomites offered the best yet, Cordoi and roller passes. There was still a surprise round every corner. The tyre problem was assuming serious proportions. There was talk of shipping in extra supplies.
The tyre cover has actually burst.
And you can see the bulge here, where the rubber's pulled away from the bead.
So, what's the problem? You can't get the spare wheel on now.
Oh, that's nothing. I mean, that's just because I haven't got a spanner that fits it.
So, you're now starting to run out of tyres, are you?
I've run out of tyres. So I hope that we can borrow one from somebody. These are faults that just shouldn't happen with modern tyre manufacture. That's on.
Better.
That's on. Now she's taking. Wind it all the way so you can get the locking.
It's a good thing, isn't it?
Well, it stops the wheels coming off. But it won't stop the punctures.
The oldest car here is this 1911 Ghost that has come all the way from Australia to take part. Because of last-minute repairs, it literally missed the boat and had to be flown here by jumbo jet. Amazingly, it fitted in the hold with 2 inches to spare. Now, the engine, I've got to be pretty careful here because I'm petrified of scratching it. The engine, like all the Ghosts here, 7.5 litres, 6 cylinders in 2 banks of 3, producing between 50 and 60 horsepower and a top speed of 60 miles an hour. It's one of the few cars on the event without an electric starter, so it's a matter of cranking by hand, but I'm told it's very easy. There you are. Look at that. What they didn't tell me was that cranking Ghosts is a rather hazardous occupation, and any Ghost owner worth his salt has probably broken at least 1 arm in their career. But whatever its bad habits, they can be tolerated when a car is finished like this. Surprising as it may seem, not all Rolls-Royces were made in Britain. Between 1921 and 1926, Rolls-Royce had a factory at Springfield, Massachusetts, USA, where they made 1,700 models like these. The engines were made in America, and they had American bodywork, which was generally considered to be more fashionable than their British counterparts, but I'm not quite sure about these wheels. The American cars had bumpers years ahead of the British ones, shock-absorbing too. Components like the headlights were locally made, and the US customer liked to personalise his rolls with accessories like these hand indicators or an extra set of tail lights. The wheel was usually on the left, and there was a more modern gear lever, but the early cars were only available with right-hand drive. Sir Henry Royce clearly considered that what was good enough for the British was good enough for the rest of the world. The big talking point of the Motorola Alpine 93 was the inclusion of Slovenia and war-torn Croatia in the schedule. The nearest fighting was nearly 100 miles away from the route, but many were apprehensive of this trip into unknown territory with strange names on the signposts.
Welcome to Croatia, to Opatija. I hope the weather will be fine.
Why not? Why not?
Why not?
If it rains, no problem.
No problem. Beautiful car.
Thank you, thank you.
I came through here, of course, when this country was Yugoslavia, about 25 years ago, more 30 years ago. And, of course, when I was last here, this place was just one country. Now, the roads are pretty dreadful. And there's not much sign of them being repaired at the moment either.
So you've got a good stock of tyres and wheels up
No,
your...
don't talk to me about tyres again, please. I pray I've got enough to last me out. You'll see the varied tyres and tubes tied on the side of the car now.
The southernmost point of the tour was Opatija, and since the tourism industry has died somewhat, the town is now a pale shadow of its former self. But there was a warm welcome for the travellers and a chance for me to find out what it's like to be on board one of these magnificent machines. I joined my friend, Mr. Dutoit.
Now let's just take off in top gear. Here we are going off really flexibly, as you can tell.
Isn't that amazing?
And it's in gear. I mean, we've taken off. Here we are, just wafting along in top gear. Silent as a ghost. The flexibility of these cars were one of the big selling points. I tell you, these cars are really humbling cars from the gearbox department. Every now and again, every single one of us misses a gear. It's something that we hope we never have on camera.
You probably will have.
And what we're doing is getting it in without touching the clutch. That makes it easier. Now we open up. Whoops,
oh, dear.
Missed it. It's pretty easy to miss sometimes if you're over exuberant. So let's just put it in without the clutch. There we go.
What about the old steering? Is it the arms ache at the end of the day?
Well, for this car, no. As a matter of fact, we knew they had the lightest steering of any car around, and properly lubricated, these cars are just fantastic in the steering department. The road holding and the steering, very good. And most of the time, you would be driving at 1,000 revs, 1,500 max. As a matter of fact, these cars will idle down to 80 revolutions a minute. And you can actually count the beats coming out of the exhaust.
So what are all these other things for on the steering wheel, Derek?
Well, this one here is the governor. It's a kind of an automatic pilot that just allows you to rev up and keep a sensible speed. For example, if you wanted to do 30 miles an hour, say, keep it at this sort of speed. If you wanted to do 38 or 39, you keep it up there. It acts like a modern system that keeps you going at a steady speed.
And what's the one on the other side?
That's the ignition. This says early and late. So you have an early spark, which is where we are at the moment for running along. When you start the car in the morning, you would have it down here at late, so you don't get a kickback. But it's just a method of adjusting the spark. Today it's done automatically. In those days, you did it by hand and listening to what the engine sounded like. These are all the various electrical switches, and the one on the top is the mechanism for adjusting the carburetor strength.
What's that little thing on the floor there?
The exhaust cutout.
Yeah.
That's when you're using them in anger or exuberance. Here we go.
Doesn't sound at all Rolls Royce.
Here we go.
Oh, my hat's on. Slovenia was the next port of call on this amazing expedition. Everyone was assured the welcome would be warm, but they hadn't expected quite the enthusiastic receptions they received everywhere, such as in Vipava, where the whole town turned out in force. For me, it was a sort of this is your loaf. Hello. What's all this then?
This is our specialty, food specialty. We give this for all guests who came to Slovenia first. And you take a piece of bread, Slovene bread, and then you put into the salt.
Oh, splendid. Do you do this for all guests?
Yes,
all visitors?
All the time. No, just for the special days.
This is salt, is it?
Yes.
It certainly is.
Is it good?
Very nice. Lovely. Very good.
Yeah.
But I think it might make me thirsty. I need a beer now. You got some beer?
Yes.
Slovenia wheeled out a few classics of its own to add to the atmosphere, but there was no doubting the real stars of the show. After his navigational difficulties, solo driver Alan Clark had flown out his wife Jane to keep him on the straight and narrow. headed northwards through the country over some roads of differing standards. But wherever it went, this amazing convoy was sure to attract interest. People were showered with gifts of wine and chocolates, offered drinks by the roadside, and generally given a rave reception. There was no end to the happenings. In Slovenia, it was like going back in time. What better setting for the Silver Ghosts? On roads that were in exactly the same condition that they were in 80 years ago, the ex-James Radley car was utterly at home. But the famous Radley hat had disappeared to be replaced by a humble cap. Wherever you went in the country, you couldn't escape the fairy tale atmosphere. John and Susie Jeeves, cotton farmers from Zimbabwe, whose car had spent most of its life on the game reserves of Africa, had seen nothing like it. The crowds literally lined the streets to greet the cars, not least in the medieval town of Skopje-Loka. The emotions were flooding back and forth.
Great!
What do you think? What do you think of the roads out here?
No, they're a little bit bumpy, but we are used to that in Zimbabwe.
Oh, yes, he's home from home for you.
And this car is used to it too. I think lots of people would complain about this Murram road we went over, but that was very good.
And the ex-Safari rally driver there, you see, you're in your element.
I was back at home again, you see.
He would have had like some rain on that road.
Yeah, that would have made it really interesting.
One thing that's very interesting, as soon as we crossed the border between Italy and Slovenia, the price of fuel dropped by about a third. It's cheap motoring here in Slovenia, and long may it last that way. As a Scotsman, that's important.
As a Scotsman, as an American, it's important too.
What's happened here, Don?
We've got a little hole in the radiator, and Don's kindly plugging it for me.
In one tube. If you notice the bottom of the radiator right around in front, there's about 5 tubes of repair. That's the problem.
This is pretty serious, isn't it?
No, not leaking very much.
The other end.
I could get 50 miles.
Well, we got a little small hammer, John. Yeah. I want to give it the old tap treatment and see if we can do this without wrecking the rest of the radiator. That's the real liability here, is ruining the radiator worse than it was. Someone stole my beer.
There seems to be no holding the organisers of this spectacle. As the cars leave Slovenia, there's the option of a drive over this rough old Leibel Pass, last used by traffic 25 years ago and specially opened for this event. Now, one car that will feel very much at home is the ex-James Radley Silver Ghost, which last stormed over here in 1913. Sadly, its owner, John Kennedy, broke his arm last night when the starting handle kicked back, so the controls have been taken over by Colin Crabb.
It's a lot lighter than mine. Of course, a lot earlier. The brakes are different, power curve is different. But I drove it 40 or 50 miles yesterday to try it out. It seems to be magnificent.
So what's the significance of this Leibel Pass, then?
Well, I think it was the hardest pass in the 1913 trial. And I think it's very significant to Rolls-Royce's end of story, because it proved their reliability.
Yes.
And so far to date, we started off with 44 cars. We've still got 44 cars. Whether we will after this pass, I'm not so sure.
If you're going a bit fast and you lose your grip on your front wheels a bit. So really slow in.
Slow in?
Yes.
Power.
Yeah, and once you're straight,
yes.
The old...
Keep going.
And I think let the back tires down a bit.
Yes. Yes.
told me the hardest part is parking.
Well, you just about got it right, yes. No, it was absolutely super duper, yes, sir. No real problems at all.
A lot of people with the older cars weren't going to come. They thought it would be too demanding.
Well, I thought so too. My wife thought it was even worse. But I persuaded her, and I'm glad we came. And I think she's glad.
What does she think of it?
Pretty hairy, pretty hairy.
Oh. Hello.
Hi.
Did that come up to expectations?
No, not really. It was too easy.
Really? Too easy?
Well, yeah, it was just a matter of staying in bottom and, you know, locking it over on each corner.
What do you think of that?
Marvellous, marvellous. Tough. I mean, the road's not very good, as you've probably discovered coming up, but we've done it.
But what a wonderful view and a wonderful experience, boy.
And you're actually going back to do it again?
I'm going to do it right now. In fact, they kicked me out of here, so...
While the ebullient Don Mayer went back for another attack, I went down to the bottom to face Alan Clark and the car that found it all so easy.
This car's certainly attracting a lot of attention, but it's hardly the shiniest vehicle here.
No, well, I don't wash it very often. I think it's because it looks so rakish, and it's so light, you know. It looks as if it's really meant to fly up and down the hills, which it's been doing. It started life as a very formal saloon, and it was cut down just after the Great War in India and used by the military there as it had a machine gun on the back on a pillar, and I suppose they used it for machine gunning the natives, I don't know. But when that practice died away, the car just stood idle for years and years, and I bought it in 1966, and we've never touched the engine. I mean, we've changed the oil, but it must be. There's 1919 sludge all over the inside of that engine because it's never been opened. It really is a tribute to that engine and that chassis that all these cars, many of them grossly overweight and, you know, many of them, shall we say, indifferently driven in terms of sympathy with the machine, and yet not one is broken. I don't understand it. We're 3/4 of the way around and we've climbed Mount Everest 3 times or whatever the equivalent is, and they're still all in one piece.
And the mascot there, what's the significance
The
of
mascot is a bat, Fledermaus as they call it in Austria. It's a vampire, if you like, but it's the bat out of hell, actually. You couldn't put a lady on a car like that. She'd have a hot flush, I think.
What about the actual war history of Rolls-Royces in the First World War?
Well, they were critically important. I mean, they went with Lawrence of Arabia, you know, and there are pictures of them going into Damascus, a famous picture of a car looking very like that, actually. That was a sort of military configuration for them, with Lawrence in the passenger seat and his corporal driving him in. Well, it used to have a machine gun here, Tony, you see, on a tower in the middle, just at about that level. And there's a tray for the belt and a tray for the empties either side, and there was a little chair at the back, almost like a typist's stool, for the gunner, and something else for the loader, you know, the man who feeds the belt.
We're now back in Austria after 3 days of driving in Slovenia and Croatia, but it's not the end of the interest in that part of the world for the Rolls-Royce drivers, because they've been collecting money to rebuild a children's hospital in Osijek in Croatia in collaboration with the Red Cross. The fundraising started months before this event with all sorts of activities, from coffee mornings in Macclesfield to parachute jumping in Sussex, and they're still collecting.
Before they'd even finished the tour, takings had reached around £50,000. And the event organisers, the Rolls-Royce Enthusiast Club, are still receiving donations.
All the drivers keep saying how fabulous these cars are to drive. Well, there's only one way of finding out if they're right. I hope I don't break it. Take up the clutch.
And off we go. You can put your foot right flat.
Oh yeah, look at that.
The revs will drop right down. It'll sound like it's going to stall, but you keep going.
We're off. Look at the speed building up.
That's right, and now we're cruising.
Great. It was brilliant to drive. It handled as sure-footedly as any modern car I'd ever driven. But what I wanted to know was how much these cars were worth. I kept asking, but nobody was telling me.
We don't discuss it where we live. You know, security is a great problem.
It's very hard to put a value on these cars. I mean, they are a collector's item, and it's very hard to identify what something is worth to a particular person. And
I mean, I wouldn't have a clue what mine is worth, and it's sort of academic, I suppose, if you've had it a while and you don't intend selling it.
I won't talk about the value.
Oh, well done.
I wouldn't sell my car for anything, so it doesn't matter what it's worth. It might be worth what I paid for it, which is £900, or it might be worth more. But it doesn't make the slightest difference to me. You could offer me anything for it, I wouldn't sell it. Not now, anyway.
The answer is anything from well over £750,000 for the oldest and most original, down to £30,000 for something with an ugly replica body in rather poor condition. And originality can be very important. This 1922 Tourer has never been restored, despite an active life which involved a spell in Jamaica. Others have been rebodied 3 or 4 times during the course of their lives. The splendid coachwork on this one dates from as recently as 1989. It spent its life in Ireland, Australia and America. Now, however, it was back to Vienna along with the 43 other ghosts. First home, almost needless to say, were Alan and Jane Clark, who arrived in advance of any of the crowds. For everyone, there was a sense of having achieved something which they would probably never experience again in their lifetime. Big cheers awaited Keith and Kerry Wherry from Sydney, who had piloted their 1911 car back to the finish line to receive their medal.
Congratulations. Well done. I hope you enjoyed your rally. Very much.
But amid all the celebrations and ceremony, what about the few sceptics on the event?
I mean, what a performance those ghosts have put on. I'm not a ghost man, you know. I'm not even a member.
Now. You've got to be.
I think I'm becoming a convert, you know. Because it's an incredible record to take that number of cars around quite severe conditions in stinking hot weather and have so many finishes. What an achievement.
It's incredible, isn't it, that these 80-year-old cars have completed 1,750 really very grueling miles with virtually no mechanical histrionics. I find myself wondering whether in the year 2073 people will be doing similarly demanding things in their Ford Mondeos and Vauxhall Cavaliers. And I say to myself, no, because the roads will still be full of people trundling around in their 160-year-old Rolls-Royce Silver Ghosts.